And I want to thank you for this kind invitation. I am so pleased and privileged to help support the work of the ICJU and have so much respect for the work that you all do and the work that Peter Pettit does. So this is indeed a privilege and an honor for me. So thank you. I want to say just a word about what I'm going to do today. You notice that the title up there is Sacrifice and U.S. War Culture. My work is as a Christian theologian and ethicist, and I originally did my PhD in Christian understandings of redemption or atonement. Sacrifice, of course, is one of the primary images of atonement in Christianity. And so that's really what my work grew out of. Following September 11th, I began to notice that language and logic of sacrifice really began to grow in our culture. I was hearing it in politics. I was seeing it in the media. I was finding it all over popular culture. And I suppose I'm a bit alert to this because of my theological and ethical study and research. But that really propelled me into a whole new area of study to begin to explore the relationship between this language and its theological as well as political groundings, and then the way that it was growing in all of these other realms of the U.S. culture. So today what I'm going to do is really not talk much at all about sacrifice and that part of my research. But what I was propelled into was really an analysis and an exploration of what I have come to call U.S. war culture as a site for the growth and the operations of sacrificial rhetoric, practices, and logic. So today I'm going to talk quite a bit and try to unfold different facets of what I call U.S. war culture. So I talk about war culture as the normalized interpenetration of the institutions, ethos, and practices of war into ever-increasing facets of daily human life, economy, institutions, and not least important, imagination in the United States context. I should say that one could explore the reality of war culture in many different cultures of the world. My work centers specifically on the way in which this operates in the U.S. context. I'm not saying that it's not present in other places, but I feel particularly compelled, and for reasons that I think will become clear to you, to explore this reality here. And what I'm going to do today then is talk a little bit about some of these various facets where I explore the operations of war culture. In military buildups, economics, everyday life, popular culture, youth culture, practices of military recruitment, the branding or marketing of war and war culture, and I'm not going to talk so much about war culture in educational institutions today, but that has become an increasingly important site for my research and analysis. The place where I begin actually is with Eisenhower, President Eisenhower's last speech to the United States before the end of his presidency. You may know that he actually coined the term the military-industrial complex, and that's an important place for us to start with exploring the realities of war culture. It's a wonderful speech, and at the conclusion of his speech, Eisenhower listed out a number of warnings that he thought we U.S. citizens should pay special attention to with respect to the dangers of the U.S. military complex. And I can see that you're reading these, so I won't read them out loud, but you see, you already begin to see the relationships of this kind of dynamic of interpenetration as war and the institutions and the ethos of war begin to seep into and affect, in Eisenhower's minds, government, Congress, and the corporate world. So these were the three areas that he was particularly worried about: the defense industry, the corporate world, and government, Congress, Senate, the executive branch. Okay. And then this warning, we should take nothing for granted, he concluded by saying. Only an alert and knowledgeable citizenry can compel the proper meshing of the huge industrial and military machinery of defense with our peaceful methods and goals so that security and liberty may prosper together. Now, some scholars have referred instead of using the term war culture, they talk about the term militarization. And that's a traditional term that refers to the dominance of the military over civilian authority, the prevalence of warlike values in society, and now increasingly contemporary scholars utilize the terminology of militarization to refer to much these same realities. I want to share one definition of militarization with you that comes from scholar Catherine Lutz. She writes, "Militarization is a discursive process involving a shift in general societal beliefs and values in ways that are necessary to legitimate the use of force, the organization of large standing armies and their leaders, and the higher taxes or tribute used to pay for them. Militarization is an intensification of the labor and resources allocated to military purposes, including, and here's the important part for my purposes, including the shaping of other institutions in synchrony with military goals." So what I'm particularly interested in is the way in which all of these other institutions are shaped, are formed, are impacted, and again, the kind of interdependent relationship that arises. Political scientist Chalmers Johnson has talked about 4 different periods of intense military buildups that began with the Korean War, continued during the Vietnam War, a third occurred under the presidency of Ronald Reagan, and then the fourth, the boon that was overseen by the Bush administration following the attacks of 9/11. Militarization is characterized by at least 3 different indicators. First, the growth of a professional military class and the glorification of its ideals. Andrew Bosovich has written that this same kind of glorification has become central to the way that Americans tend to think about their identity and the meaning of their identity. The glorification of the military is central for us, he writes. Second, militarization is characterized by the infiltration of military officers or representatives of the arms industry into elevated government positions. I'm going to talk about the revolving door of elites in a little while, and that's what this refers to. And then finally, third, militarization is characterized by an increasing embrace of policies that emphasize military preparedness as the highest priority of the state. Signs of in culture's war crease. This also comes from Chalmers Johnson, and once again I'll allow you to read this on your own. In terms of the fourth on the list, the increased contracting out of military base construction. According to a recent report that was released in June 29 by the Bipartisan Legislative Commission on Wartime Contracting in Iraq and Afghanistan, now more than 240,000 contractor employees are working in Iraq and Afghanistan to support the U.S. military. Over 240,000. They provide vital services, but the Commission also believes that their use has entailed billions of dollars lost to waste, fraud, and abuse. Chalmers Johnson, in addition to the military buildups, also sees the sheer growth and presence of so many military bases, both domestically and internationally, as a primary sign of war culture. The number of bases fluctuates somewhat, but most recently, the number that was released by the Defense Department was 761 international bases outside the United States. Once again, this quote comes from Chalmers Johnson. He asks, well, what is really the purpose of all of these international bases? He describes it as force projection, the maintenance of American military hegemony over the rest of the world. Additional facets of war culture include this interpenetration with U.S. economics. According to Nobel Prize winner Stiglitz and his partner Linda Bilmes, we should expect to pay over $3 trillion for the Iraq-Afghanistan war. And this number, this figure now is a tiny bit dated. It may be even more now, and the numbers have shifted between Iraq and Afghanistan, but he estimated that we were paying over $16 billion a month on the wars in 2008. That, by the way, is equal to the annual budget of the UN. That number, $16 billion, doesn't begin to account for what are, quote unquote, the regular expenses of the Defense Department. The $16 billion was over and above that. Coming back to the issue of fraud and abuse, according to Stiglitz, 2007 was the 10th year in a row that the Defense Department, quote, flunked its own financial audit. Some of the next slides come from sociologist Nick Turse, who has explored the interpenetration of the institutions and practices of war in various aspects of U.S. culture. These slides, and this is his terminology, Pentagon petrol pushers, list the various oil corporations that have lucrative military contracts. And there's actually another slide here. The average soldier in the U.S. military consumes 16 gallons of oil per day. And in fact, following discrete nations and sovereign states, the U.S. military is the #1 single consumer of oil in the world. I want to move now to talk about the interpenetration of practices and the reality of war in everyday life in the United States. One of the issues that I have mused over and struggled with so much as I have been studying this is, why does it seem as though nobody's really concerned about this? Why are so few people concerned? And what I've come to understand is that war culture is a normalized, naturalized reality for the vast majority of Americans. In fact, it's really everywhere. And so something that is everywhere means that we don't tend to see it very readily. It's in so many different parts of our lives and has become such a regular aspect of our lives that it doesn't surprise us. In fact, we expect it. And so I began to ask, well, how does this happen? How does it happen that this has become such a regular, normalized, naturalized aspect of our life? Something like war. That has led me into much of my research. And this particular quote, which comes from Nick Turse, takes that initial coined phrase, the military-industrial complex from Eisenhower, but now morphs it into something that is much, much larger, impacting many, many more areas of our lives, infiltrating all kinds of aspects of culture that we tend not to think about very much. One of the things that takes place as a result of this interdependent relationship is a process that scholars have called legitimation, whereby increasingly a kind of militarized ethos and set of values are used to help sell products of all kinds. And vice versa. Products reach into militarized ethos and values in order to brand their products.